Ohio State stays perfect with not necessarily a completely perfect performance, but a pretty darn good one. 35-7 is the win over the Hawkeyes. These are snap judgments. He's Jeremy Birmingham. I am Austin Ward. Yeah, first half could have been a little bit better offensively. Defense is dominant. Defense is dominant in both halves. That's pretty good. You can hang your hat on that. And eventually you figure the Buckeyes are going to get untracked on offense and get rolling, and they did. They win comfortably over the Hawkeyes, 5-0. They say they want to turn their attention immediately to Oregon. We're not going to do that. Let's talk about the Iowa game.
This game felt to me like the first half felt almost like the inverse of last week's game at Michigan State, where a week ago it was the defense not really doing its job, but then forcing turnovers and, bend but don't break. And today it's the offense like bending stuff, but then not breaking through. And you have a 4th and 2 that you go for that you don't get on if we're going to, let's call a spade. It's probably the first time all season I've watched a Chip Kelly play call and I'm like, I don't agree with that. And then you have a fumble on J.J. Smith, it happens. It's a great play by Jay Higgins there to come through and punch the ball out. Ohio State teaches that. I'm sure Iowa does too.
Yeah.
And then the interception, which was almost like a complete replica of the pass rush that Iowa used against Donovan Jackson 2 years ago when they sacked C.J. Stroud and he fumbled and they picked it up and scored. And this time it was a touchdown or an interception thrown by Will Howard. But I'll tell you, when Ohio State walked up this tunnel at the end of the first half, there was nobody who was like in a down mood. There was a bunch of guys who looked really pissed off. And I didn't really know what to expect coming out of the second half. Brandon Ennis takes that first kickoff and you're like, I don't know why you're doing that. But then you start to wonder, maybe the message at halftime was
make a play.
Yeah. Be aggressive. Do something, because Iowa is not good enough to play with Ohio State for 60 minutes. They weren't good enough to play with them for 20 minutes, if we're calling a spade again.
Ohio State had 199 yards in the first half. They just weren't able to, obviously, because of the turnovers, punch it into points.
Yeah, and Iowa, kudos to them. They know who they are, and they force you to beat them. That's the nice thing about a team like this. And Ohio State was not doing enough of the stuff they needed to do in the first half. Second half, totally different story. And you saw Will Howard. What makes him special, I think, is just that he does not hold on to bad things at all. Like that, it is in and out of his head. The interception's bad. Comes out in the second half, just lights it up. He finishes with 5 total touchdowns. Obviously, the second and third touchdown passes to Emeka Egbuka were just absolutely beautiful.
Yep.
Those are balls that were thrown on a line in a spot where I don't know that an average quarterback even tries.
Right.
And it shows a lot of confidence for Will Howard, and this speaks about why Ohio State has so much confidence in him.
I wondered about what you picked up from the players heading up this tunnel at halftime, because I was laser focused on Caden Curry getting into a fight, right as the whistle blew and the officials separate them. They didn't throw flags. Good job on that on their part to let that play out the way that it did and diffuse it a little bit. But Caden, we talk about his effort and the motor and the way he approaches the game and his aggressiveness. I wondered if that was going to be the case with more people in this tunnel as they went in and regrouped at halftime.
Sometimes you need a juice bringer. You need somebody to prod everyone, and that is certainly what Caden does. It was to the point I couldn't see who started the scrum, but it was like Caleb Downs who was the one being pulled back by everyone. And so to me, when you have that happening and it's a guy who's normally so level-headed and so cool, you can tell the defense especially was like, man, this team does not belong on the field with us. Caleb Johnson had 18 yards rushing in the first half on 11 carries. It was a complete domination thanks to Tyleik Williams' return. And so the question I asked pregame was, has the last 2 weeks been about no Tyleik Williams and we don't know what you have behind him, or has it been about some bigger hole? And I think the answer was pretty clear. It's about Tyleik Williams, and he dominated this game in the first half.
Yeah, it really wasn't about just what he brings to the defensive line or what he's doing to the opposing offensive line, which is a frightening sight to behold. He's playing it. He was really good a year ago, and I was raving about that and the way that he had elevated and attacked the offseason and got the conditioning and was doing everything right. He's gone even further now. Now we're just getting a glimpse at how dominant he can be, but it doesn't just help the Ohio State defensive line. It appeared to make and clear up the picture a little bit for the linebackers as well, most notably Sonny Styles, who, we said if you're looking at this game and who's the person that's going to be in the spotlight has been targeted maybe by opponents in the last couple weeks. It was sunny, and he responded with clearly his best game as a linebacker, maybe his best game overall at Ohio State.
I think it probably was. I mean, you knew what Iowa was going to do. There's no secret to what Iowa does. They run the ball, they throw to the tight ends. They did a nice job early in the game, taking advantage of Ohio State playing soft on the corner spots. And again, that's a confusing thing to me, I guess. I'm not sure in a game like this why you wouldn't basically press the entire game, because you knew they were not going to beat you deep,
or even try.
But sometimes you have to give a little to take what you want, and they wanted Iowa to try and run the ball, which is something. I mean, Caleb Johnson finished with, I think, 86 yards, but he had two 28-yard runs, I think. So he had like 2 runs for 56 yards and 20 for 20 yards. So just a really great defensive performance. I don't know that we've talked about it much in the first 5 weeks, first 4 games. What Jim Knowles and the defensive staff are doing at halftime, and what Chip Kelly and the offensive staff have done at halftime, has been really, really special to pay attention to. So we talked all offseason about how this is probably the most complete coaching staff Ryan Day's had, and you can see this is not a panicked group at all.
Yeah, and I would say I don't want it to come off as like revisionist history or changing the fact that Ohio State would like to start and have more complete first halves than they did tonight. But they can almost approach any game where it's like they have the talent advantage. It certainly feels like, with what you're mentioning, a decided schematic advantage against most staffs, and Iowa has a very good one. Like they raved about Phil Parker, and they've been better on offense, even by Iowa standards, whatever. But if both of those things are true, Ohio State can almost go into games and just feel out 2 or 3 rounds before they know that they're going to leave no doubt and knock you out at some point. Like, that's not a world that they want to live in necessarily. That's probably not what they want to do on the road against Oregon next Saturday night. But it's something that they can do, because once they figure out how to attack you, they have the personnel on both sides of the football to do it. And when that switch is flipped, they're going to pull away from pretty much any team in the country.
I was watching that first half, and at times it feels like Chip Kelly was playing into what Iowa wanted him to do, but it felt like it was being done on purpose. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. Ohio State was running the ball very well. I mean, another guy who we talk about a lot and give some glowing reviews to, but Carlos Lockwood, the difference that he's made in these running backs is night and day between last year and this year. The energy they play with is incredible. But Ohio State could have just kept running the ball instead of these 1-yard passes, 2-yard passes, 3-yard passes. But in the second half, they run the ball, and then you get some shots down the field. Thanks to the defense giving you short fields, like this game got out of hand quick. But I think Iowa deserves a lot of credit. The defense does not beat themselves, so they force you to be perfect. Ohio State was not perfect in the first half, despite the fact that Will Howard once again was like 10 for 10 to start the game, which I think that's the 3rd time this year he's done that. I can't imagine that's ever happened before.
No, yeah. Since the opener, that's pretty much been the way it's worked out for them every game.
Come second half, I mean, Ryan Day, like, again, I sometimes feel like we repeat ourselves, but this reinvention, this reinvigoration, maybe the more appropriate word, like the 4th and 2 that you don't get in the first half, you're like, that's an interesting play call. First drive of the second half, it's 4th down, and you go for it again, and you're like, yeah, screw it, we're going to do it, and they did, and it paid off perfectly, obviously. So, really, it's hard to complain about anything in this game. I mean,
the turnovers, and that's it. I mean,
but again, this game could have very well been 24-0 at half if Ohio State handles its business and doesn't get stopped and doesn't turn the ball. Because the drive where Jeremiah Smith fumbled, Ohio State was going to score on that drive. That was at the 28-yard line. Like, that was an easy one. That was like, oh, this is fun.
And the game will be over.
Gabe Powers. So like it's right. The game would have been over, and that's ultimately what it came down to. I think walking up this tunnel, they knew heading into the second half, if we score, the game's over. And which is, I think, why Ryan Day was so mad that you force Iowa to punt you the ball back with a minute to go in the first half. You get the ball almost at midfield, and then you have just a boneheaded play by Will. Sometimes you just got to eat it. He had another play in this game. The sack that where he allowed himself to lose 5 yards, when it's like, you don't need to do that. You can just throw it away. But you want guys to compete, and I'm positive that the message at halftime was make some plays, go out there and be aggressive, because the Buckeyes were a different team in the second half.
Yeah, Will Howard did that. And I think, I don't know for sure if I'm arguing against Johnny Strawman or not, but can more people talk about Emeka Egbuka, please? America, National College Football Writers, I'm begging you. This team is not just Jeremiah Smith making one-handed touchdowns. And Emeka,
it's also that.
It's also that. It's the combination of the two that makes them so incredibly dangerous and elevates the passing attack. Emeka almost has to have 3 touchdown games just to avoid the fact that everyone's going to be playing the highlight reels of Jeremiah again. But like, he is so good. And the healthy version of Emeka Egbuka that we really did not see at all last year, to some extent we haven't seen it in a long time, he changes everything.
He does. And even on a night like tonight, where Ohio State was without Carnell Tate, who will be back next week, I asked him coming off the field, like, could you have played? And he said, yes. And then he said, if JJ didn't save the day with the one-handed catch, I was coming in the game. I don't know if that's true, because I asked somebody who would have a much bigger part in making that decision, and he said that wasn't true.
Yeah.
But I did notice Carnell coming out of half, like looking like a guy who was getting ready to play, not somebody who was taking the day off. So, no, it's pretty insane how good this offense can be. And then you add in a piece like Emeka that has been taken for granted since his freshman year here, a guy who is going to end up leaving Ohio State as the all-time leader in receptions and yards and maybe touchdowns. Like
triple ding dongs help.
And he's been like overlooked, and it's pretty crazy. But that just speaks about what happens when you're playing next to Marvin Harrison or now Jeremiah Smith. So it's pretty good. And for anybody who's watching this, obviously you probably watched both predictions. Austin did predict 3 touchdowns for Emeka Egbuka in this game, so he gets that one right. And America, I need your help. We gotta go to the tape here. I predicted that Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins would each outrush Caleb Johnson. And Caleb Johnson got 40-plus yards on the last drive of the game that he was in on when Ohio State did not have their starters in on defense. I submit that should not count for the BP. And in the game that mattered against the starters, I was right. Because Caleb Johnson's last run, a 28-yard touchdown run, he finished with 25 more yards rushing than Travion Henderson. So
I'm inclined to give it to you. Yeah. And you know why?
Because it was bold. Because you're feeling generous because you won yours?
Because I said that he was going to have fewer than 65 yards rushing.
That's true.
And so I want you to get this right, because then I would have 2.
Yeah, and it was a spicy pepper, if we can call it like what it is.
Absolutely.
I mean, you and Bill were like, ooh, that's spicy.
It was.
Ooh, Gabe Powers.
It was spicy.
But, I was right.
But I think that, especially when this team has Tyleik Williams, and over the last, this is my 13th season covering Ohio State, I mentioned it on Bold Peas. If there's a team out there that thinks, hey, got a Heisman Trophy caliber running back, he's getting, and Caleb Johnson he was interviewed by the Heisman Trophy people on their podcast this week. He was getting that sort of acclaim. He's one of the most productive running backs in the country. But you think back to Melvin Gordon or Wisconsin backs throughout the years, or Derrick Henry. If teams are out there that say, hey, this is who we are, and we're going to run the ball in Ohio State, almost every time. In fact, I'm struggling to think of one example where a team that hung its hat on a tailback like that and said, Ohio State can't stop us. They don't.
If you want to know why we argue about why I like Lane Kiffin, it's because he stopped giving the ball to Derrick Henry, because he was absolutely shredding the Ohio State defense in that game.
Pretty generous.
That's why I have a soft spot for Lane Kiffin, because he was like, our running back's too good. Yeah. We're not even going to let him play. And they were like, Blake Sims, win us this game. Okay. First time anyone ever said that. Did Alabama lose tonight? They did. That's funny. But that's again, we've talked about this a few weeks ago. Like, Ohio State doesn't lose these games, and maybe it doesn't feel great when you're up 7-0 when you should be up 21 or more at half, but they don't lose these games. And they come out in the second half, and they could have put a 50 burger on Iowa today without breaking a sweat, really, on offense. And that is shocking. Now, if you look ahead, you can't be this careless with the football at Oregon, period.
Nope.
Now, Oregon's going to, if you watch the Vandy Alabama game, you see the 40-35 final or whatever it was. Like, I think that's how next week's going to go in Autzen Stadium. I think it's going to be a 34-28, 35-31 type of game somewhere out there. But if it's that way, because Oregon does the stopping of Ohio State, they'll be the first team to do it, because this Ohio State offense is not going to be stopped by many people.
Yeah, I would be frankly stunned, even if Oregon's offense is going to be a lot more creative than Iowa's. Dylan Gabriel struggled with turnovers himself on Friday night. We're going to have plenty of time to break that down.
3 more turnovers for the defense.
Yep.
How many sacks did Ohio State end up with? 3, I think.
I don't know. They had 2 at halftime.
Can I say, last week at Michigan State, people wonder, where's JT? Where's JT? He forces an interception by just
being JT.
Did the same thing again. Like, this is why sometimes we scoff at the idea that, okay, if you don't get sacks, you're not making plays. Yeah, it's nice when Jack Sawyer gets a strip sack and a fumble, but when JT is just making the quarterback do something stupid like Cade McNamara wanted to do on that interception for Igbenogson, like, that's just as valuable. And that's why Ohio State kind of, I don't like to say laughs at people who say if you don't get sacks, you're not a good defensive end, but there's certainly ways to contribute, and the entire defense, except for the backups. Ooh, we're going to talk about that.
Wow, a little nitwhacking.
That was not nice. I asked Ryan Day, why put in the backups on defense and keep the offense out there? And he said simply, those guys need to play, and I didn't want to have the offense go out there with the backups and let things get weird. Yeah. So they went out there, they killed another minute and a half, 2 minutes off the clock, and they didn't even get a first down. But he was like, at that point, then you know it's over and it's not going to get weird. But he just didn't want it to get weird.
Yep, wanted to get it to the finish line where he said that Ohio State would immediately be shifting its focus towards Oregon. Will Howard conceded that he had probably already done that during the off week, glancing ahead at what they might be a while ago. This game has been in Ohio State's mind for a while.
September off week.
It's here, and we're going to talk a lot about Ohio State and Oregon in the week during the week ahead on the podcast. We have all of the content that you would come to expect before Berm and I hit the road on Thursday. That will put a bow on 35-7 Ohio State over Iowa in the Horseshoe Saturday night. They improved to 5-0, first Big Ten home win of the season. It's in the books. So is Snap Judgments. He's Berm. I'm Austin. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll talk to you later.